So we have done the big ideas. We have defined the experience of social well-being ethics, and we've talked about the definition. We've talked about what ethics is and how it can be quantified. And then we've looked at it in a significant case, the case of the driverless car and how it might rank the value of human lives. The last thing to do is to think about what are some of the objections to this theory. And there are three major kinds of objections. Uh, the one is an objection against the entire idea of social well-being. That is, underneath the idea of this consequentialist theory is some sense that all human beings have similar kinds of experience. That is, it's possible to compare my happiness against your happiness. And then once we do that, then we can make this decision going back to the car about who should live and who should die. Um, but you can make the argument that no, you just can't do that. You can make the argument that the humans are so diverse in the ways that they feel happiness and in the amounts of happiness and suffering that they feel. Um, the entire theory founders on this practical difficulty. We simply will not be able to count up happiness and sadness in a society because everybody is so different. So the conclusion would be the theory sounds good in practice, but you can't make it work in reality because people are just too different. What counts as happiness and sadness for you and for me is just too far apart for any kind of algorithm to capture effectively. So that's one argument against the theory. Another way of making that argument, um, here is a case, a good emotion AI case, where some people make the argument that Facebook and Instagram and those kinds of um, online apps are toxic, especially for teenage girls. Reasons for that, I think, are fairly obvious. Struggles to fit into a model or perfect kind of body and so on. Also, just simple doom scroll. We all know these apps are somewhat toxic just for the reason of doom scrolling. Um, so, on the one hand, we could say that there's the practical problem as we saw on the previous slide, that it's hard to know what makes happiness or sadness for you and me. There's also a practical problem just in terms of what counts as toxicity, right? And when we say, look, the doom scrolling is bad, but how do you count that? What number do you assign when I waste 20 minutes doom scrolling? How do I assign a number to that? So this is another form of the practical problem. The practical problem can be understood either in terms of the world and its events, like what 15 minutes of doom scrolling is worth how much pleasure or how much suffering. Or the same argument can be made in terms of individuals. And that is that 15 minutes of doom scrolling is 15 units of happiness for me, but 15 units of unhappiness for you. And it's so different for everybody that the entire theory just becomes unworkable. So that's the fundamental argument against utilitarianism and consequentialism. Is that on the top level, it really works well. Just add up the happiness, add up the suffering, and that's it. But when you actually try to make it work, when you try to count the happiness and count the suffering of one individual in one situation, it becomes almost impossible. So that's one objection. The other objection is, of course, just the objection we have seen um, in all of these theories. Now, you can answer the consequentialist theory in principle with other principles. And I think the driverless car is really an excellent case for that. There are many people who are going to say, at the end, I am so uncomfortable with ranking lives in terms of their happiness value. I am so resistant to the idea that I will say that someone who is in a wheelchair should be hit because they're in a wheelchair, or someone who is smoking should be hit because they are smoking. I am so uncomfortable with those realities that I would prefer just to flip a coin. I would prefer to flip a coin, even if that means that when it's a 95-year-old versus a baby, the baby might get hit. So you can make that kind of claim. And when you do that, what you are essentially saying is that you prefer a dignity ethics to a utilitarian or a consequentialist ethics. So the two kinds of um, objections to this theory are: one, you can't make it work in practice, doesn't it's too complicated; or two, even if it does, when you see the reality it produces, we're better off embracing a different theory, maybe the dignity theory, which just says we flip a coin no matter what, in the case of the driverless car. Okay, good. So that's what we have for consequentialism or utilitarianism, or more broadly, the idea of social well-being. Um, we have the idea that the experience of social well-being is something like sacrificing one individual so that others may live, because what matters for social well-being is only the overall outcome for everyone. And then we had that idea crystallized in the definition, where we say what we should do is simply that act which creates the most happiness or the least suffering when everyone is taken account of and when all the effects are simply counted up. Then we looked a little bit about what happiness is. We talked about the happiness of the mind and the body. And then we talked about the big problem, which is how happiness can be counted. And we said maybe in some ways we might talk about the happiness of a cup of coffee in terms of how much you pay for it. But the question there is, how much will you pay for friendship? How much will you pay for love? I'm not sure how well monetized utilitarianism will work for some of those questions. Then we moved on to the driverless car, and we said that the consequentialist theory is quite attractive for ethics because it does give us a way to solve a real problem in the world. What do we do? How do we program our driverless cars to make decisions when a decision must be made about who lives and who dies? The consequentialist theory gives us a way to do that. And it leads to this algorithm, which provides a value for each human life in terms of the happiness it has. Right? So lives are ranked hierarchically in terms of their value. And then finally, we talked about the practical and theoretical objections, which we have just reviewed. So I think that's enough for social well-being.